Everybody. Nice to see everybody here. We are going to complete a section of Gemara tonight and an entire, I don't know, series of shiurim that have been going on for, I guess it's stretching into years now since we began the Masechet Rosh Hashanah, because we're going to turn a corner. Yeah. So we have one more sugya to do. One more sugya to do after we finish this Gemara. Today, right, was Rosh Hashanah La'ilan. Spoke about it at the Shiva house. And it's Aleph Shvat, an auspicious day today, earlier today on the calendar, a Rosh Hashanah, because it's according to Beit Shammai. We're right now in the Gemara in Chaf Hei Amud Bet, and we're rounding out the Gemaras about Kiddush HaChodesh, and then that will leave us with one thing left to see, and that one thing will take the rest of tonight for sure, and maybe all of next time as well. But I think, given all that we've learned about Kiddush HaChodesh, you'll consider it well worth it. I found it to be very, I don't know what the word is, enriching and mind expanding about understanding elements of Kiddush HaChodesh and what it has to do with us today. So on the bottom of Chaf Hei Amud Bet, the last little piece that we have to see, it's very short, really, is the Gemara seems to ask L'meimer de'ed na'aseh dayan. Sounds like, since we have these cases where the witnesses, you have three witnesses who see the moon, they're all judges, two of them will stand up and another two will sit down. So Eid Na'aseh Dayan means that the person, one of the people who saw it, can become one of the Dayanim. Eid Na'aseh Dayan. Can someone who sees something, or witness something, and they want to testify? If you look at the last Rashi on the page, Chaf Hei Amud Bet, Misharoi Liot Eid B'Davar Na'aseh Dayan. Ve'ilu Kulan Rieeyim Liot Eidim Shari Kulam Ra'uhu. Right? They all could have been the Eidim because three of them saw it, but instead or maybe more than three, but they had to have two of them stand up and serve as Eidim, right? So maybe it goes both ways. An Eid could be a Dayan could be an Eid. But the Gemara notes, Lema Matnitin to look Rabbi Akiva. So this Mishnah seems to be against or maybe refutes the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And what opinion of Rabbi Akiva, rather? Was Rabbi Akiva Tanya? Sanhedrin, we had this actually in Tosut last time. Sanhedrin Sharo Echad Shaharag et Nefesh. So if the Sanhedrin saw a murder transpire, Miktsata Nasu Edim, Miktsata Nasu Dayanim, the Rabbi Tarfon. Let them split up, and some will be witnesses and testify before the court. The court actually already saw it with their own eyes. But as part of the procedure, they'll need to retain a court and have some of them become witnesses to testify. Rashi at the top of the page, Miktsata Nasin Edim. Either b'fnei chavereihem, the gabi din nefashot edud beina dichtiv al pi shnaim edim yumat amed lo yumat v'chulei al pi ed echad. It's not written, but yeah, you need to have two witnesses to testify as the formality of a case, even if it's a foregone conclusion because the whole court saw it happen. So two of them would stand up, and another two would have to sit down to take their place. So you fill out the number, minimum number 23 for capital cases. And they would have to announce. So Miktsata Nasin Dayanim, Rashi here, Aval Hami'idim, Lo Yeshu V'Yaduna Imahem. De'aroi Loha'id, Itla Rabbi Tarfon, Nasa Dayan. Aval Eid, Atzmo, Leitle de Nasa Dayan. Explain. Those who testify cannot now then sit and also adjudicate the same case. They can't be witnesses and judges. It can be one or the other.
They can't evaluate their own testimony.
Right. You could have had a situation where you might have said, well, they're not evaluating the testimony. The testimony was accepted by the court. Now they're just going to adjudicate whether it's grounds for execution. But again, it's kind of clumsy because so the Rashi had said, Itle Rabbi Tarfon, right? The one who is worthy of testifying. So Rabbi Tarfon says they can become a judge. He had said that. Aval Eid Atzmo. It didn't mean the witness themselves. Late Danasa Dayan. He can't become a Dayan, right? V'gabe Eid Chodesh Gufa Nami Lo Achsharna B'matnitin Liot Ha'edim Nasim Dayanim. Also with regard to Eid Chodesh. Okay, a bunch of people who are Dayanim saw the moon. Those who are going to stand up and testify to the court are not also going to be the court. Their role in this is to serve as Edom. So they don't have a hashra to do that either. To Im Kain, Lamali Yoshivu Mechaverehem. right? Why would we need two others to sit down so you have at least three receiving the testimony? Instead, right? Ya'iru bifnei yachid, v'achar kach yesvuhem imo v'yakadshu. If really you didn't, the witnesses could then become dayanim literally at the same time. They would get up from behind the table, stand in front of the dayanim table. There's one man sitting there. They say to him, "We saw the moon." He said to them, "Oh yeah, what did it look like?" They'll describe it. They'll come sit down and they'll say, "Okay, did we see? Yeah, oh, that was a good testimony. Where did the witnesses go?" You can't do that. You can't play double sides. You can't do that, right? So you can't do that, right? We have this also in Parak Sheni Ktubot that explains this. So the Eid Nasadayan means we saw it, but they could become judges. They just can't be both at the same time, and that's a Tarfon's view, right? But Rabbi Akiva had said in that case where a court witnessed a murder. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Kulan Nasim Edim. They all become witnesses, meaning they're all, as Rashi writes, Kulan Edim Heim Re'uyim Laha'id. They're all available to serve as witnesses. But what do they actually have to do? They have to all find, or some of them have to find another court to testify in front of. They can't do it themselves because they saw it. And the idea is, presumably, well, you'll see right now, right? I feel the Gemara says, no. This doesn't prove it in general because maybe capital cases are different from Kiddush HaChodesh cases or other kinds of cases, right? So I feel the Timur Rabbi Akiva. No, you could say that our Gemara does not refute Rabbi Akiva. It works even according to Rabbi Akiva's view. Ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Akiva hatam elabedina nefashot. This is the idiomatic phrase of the Gemara, right? It's impossible to translate the words almost. Until here, did Rabbi Akiva not say over there, except with regard to Dina Nefashot? In plain, simple English, when Rabbi Akiva made his statement that an aid, the Eidim cannot be Dayanim, that's especially in capital cases. Why? So it tells you why. The Rahman Amar, because the Torah says, V'shaftu ha'eda, v'yitzilu ha'eda. The group has to, meaning an assembly, has to adjudicate the case, and the assembly has to save him. Rashi, v'hatzilu ha'eda yehafchu b'schuto. They have to be able to make a case to exonerate him. It may lose the vote, but if they can't do that, it's not going to work. V'keven dechaziyu dekato nafsha, since they all witnessed the murder happen, lo matzu chazu le'zechuta, they won't really be able to find him a zchut, a merit. Aval hacha, but in our case of Kiddush HaChodesh, afil Rabbi Akiva moda, even Rabbi Akiva agrees that if three people saw the moon, one can sit down and two can testify, and they bring two other people, and the aid nasadayan. Meaning, even though one of those three judges was actually among the three witnesses initially, that guy can sit down as long as he didn't give the testimony. He serves as a judge. Mark, question.
We read Rashi.
Okay. So, believe it or not, that's the end of our share. Thank you for coming. Enjoy. The next Mishnah is ready for next time because it's all about shofar and about Rosh Hashanah. And until the end of the Masechta, pretty much, that will be our focus. From starting after the next sugya we're going to see another sugya right here. But after the next sugya, we are going to be getting ready for Rosh Hashanah. I think someone told me the CRC once that the matzah that you eat on Pesach, it's already getting late if they're only baking at Hanukkah time for the next Pesach. It's a lot of volume. That's somebody baked. I taste that way. Exactly. I actually said to him, which Hanukkah? It's like, exactly. It's aged. So I'm holding in my hand the Kovetz Chidushei Torah. That was a volume of the Torah of Rav Moshe Soloveitchik and his son, Rav Yosef Dovalevi Soloveitchik. It's essays by each of them, taken from various journals and put together in one volume. So this is actually an essay that I want to share with you, halachic essay. I'm going to put it on the screen also, called Kaviyat Mo'adim al pi ha-Rieeya v'al pi ha-Cheshbon, establishing the holidays using testimony of seeing seeing what's happening, i.e., in terms of the moon, versus using the calendar. And it was originally published in a journal that was published in Chicago it was called the Hapardes Journal, and it was published by Rabbi Hapardes. I kid you not. That was literally his name, and it was published for apparently a few decades in Chicago. It was an international journal. It was very, very well regarded, and it was made by Rabbi Hapardes. So I'm handing this out. Consider it a gift for Shvat, for Chodesh Shvat. Today is also a very auspicious day. Before it was Rosh Hashanah La'ilan, according to Beit Shammai, it is the day. What day is it in the Torah? Remember? It's mentioned in the Torah explicitly. Rosh Chodesh Shvat. I mentioned this at the Ida Crown Jewish Academy, where I've taken on a very strange, very temporary job teaching honors Chumash to 11th graders. It's today. No? Be'ashtei asar chodesh, be'echad lachodesh. First psukim in Sefer Dvarim. It was on the beginning of Sefer Dvarim happens. The Torah tells us on Rosh Chodesh of the 11th biblical month. So Nisan is 1, therefore Adar is 12, and therefore Shvat is 11. So this is the birthday of Eila Hadvarim Asher Diber Moshe. And the last lectures, in quotation marks, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Sefer Dvarim, is from the words Eila Dvarim on this day, earlier today, would have been the anniversary of it in the Midbar, until his Petira on Zion Adar. So it's a great day for the bridge between Torah Sheba'al Peh, Torah Shebichtav. So I hold this volume in my hand, and of course I have extensive notes that I prepared, but I thought instead of giving you 8 or 9 different sources, let's try to journey into this. It's, I think, an incredible essay by the Rav, which when you have the background, which now all of us are, I can be bold enough, experts in some regard, regarding how to understand issues of Kiddush HaChodesh, to actually delve into this and hopefully gain a deeper understanding. It's all as they say, laid out for you, because obviously it's an essay. So the Rav puts in all the different Makorot, and it's really just a question of reading the essay, but it's not written in the easiest language. But I thought we should do it together, that we could discuss it a little bit. I mean, it doesn't need my approbation. Some of the Rav wrote, but it's really, I found it to be incredible. So the Rav begins as follows: Aleph, and this is basically, I'll call this the coda to our learning about Kiddush HaChodesh and the moon and the new year and all of that. After that, everything else till the end of the Masechta pretty much is about Rosh Hashanah, Shofar, Mitzvah Shofar, the liturgy, other issues that come up about Tefillah B'tzibor. Really, really spectacular. Okay, so let's go. The Rambam, Perek Hey Mehilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, Halacha Aleph, Bet. So the first 2 halachot in the 5th parak. We didn't learn this. We did learn Rambam Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh. I handed out Parakim Aleph and Bet and part of Gimel and part of Yod Chet. This was a while ago, if you remember, with other Rishonim. Anyway, okay. Says the Rambam, Koma Shaman Mikviyut Rosh Chodesh Al Rieeya V'Ibor Hashana Mipnei Hazman O Mipnei Hatzorech. Everything that we've said until now about establishing the new month by seeing it, and Ibor Hashana intercalating the year, adding a month, because of the time or because of a need. Ein osin oto el Sanhedrin shiba Eretz Yisrael, o beitim hasmuchim be'Eretz Yisrael shenatan lehen Sanhedrin reshut. Either in Israel or a beitim that received its smicha in Eretz Yisrael that got reshut from the Sanhedrin to do so. Shekach nemar l'Moshe u'la'aron hachodesh zelachem rosh chodeshim. Now you already have Parshat Shavua as well, because we're coming up on Parshat Bo, so I thought it fits also because of this. U'mipias Shmua lamdu, ish me'ish mi-Moshe Rabbeinu. What does that mean? Halacha Moshe Misinai. Going all the way back. Shekachu pirish hadavar. This is the explanation. Edut zu tihya mesura lachem, v'chol omed acharechem bimkomchem. This testimony stands for you, it's given over to you, and to anyone who will stand in your place after you. Aval bizman she'ein sham Sanhedrin be'Eretz Yisrael, ein kovin chodashim, ve'im ma'abrim shanim, ela b'chashbon zeh, shan mechashvim bo hayom. But in a time when there isn't a Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael, we will not establish the months, and we will not make the Ibor Shana happen, except through a calendrical system, which we use to calculate today. V'davar zeh, halacha meloshe misinaihu. Shebizman sheyesh Sanhedrin kovin al pi Rieeya, uizman she'ein sham Sanhedrin, kovin al pi Cheshbon hazeh, she'anu mechashvin bo hayom, ve'ein nizkakin l'Rieeya. When there's a Sanhedrin established, then we can, a Sanhedrin, meaning in Eretz Yisrael, or that received smicha from Eretz Yisrael, we can use Rieeya. The witnesses come, they go to court, etc. But if we don't have a Sanhedrin that available, so we use the calendrical system that we calculate with today, and we don't require any longer to use the seeing. V'ayim b'sefer mitzvot mitzvot say kufnun gimel sharam harich b'zeh be'oto akivun. Yeah.
We can use it or we must use it? We understand it.
We no longer need the Rieeya. Means seems like we can't use it. We'll see shortly.
But when the Sanhedrin comes back,
Go back to. Sounds like he's saying Kiddush up your Rieeya. We go back.
But we can or we must. That's what I wasn't sure.
Sounds like must.
We must.
Mhm.
Okay.
But as we've already said in this year, it's not because when that will happen, the Sanhedrin doesn't already know the calculations. They do know the calculations. They're using it in the back room, but it's not determinative. Instead, they're waiting for witnesses to come to make it determinative. That's what we talked about. Remember, formerly, if you had an emergency situation where it's the winter and 3-4 months go by and the witnesses never came in any of those months, so it was 30 days of that month plus 30 days plus 30 days plus 30 days, it's going to push the year over much quicker. They're going to have to figure out a way to push it back. It was previous year. Anyway, next paragraph. Shitato bru mechuveret kesimla. It's extremely clear what he said. The Kiddush HaChodesh al pi Rieeya v'ibur hashana mipnei hazman o mipnei hatzorech tluim beit din hagadol. If you have to, that's what he means, the tzorech. The ibur hashana, because the time means the time went by. They calculated after every 3 years or so, you have about 30 days off between the lunar and the solar calendar, or because of some other need. So that has to do with Beit Din HaGadol. Dehu HaMakadesh v'HaMa'aber v'HaKoveya. The Beit Din HaGadol 71, they're the Makadesh, they're the ones who are Ma'aber the year, they're the ones who set it, right? V'yashna lach l'moshe misina ha'omeret, ki kol zman she Beit Din HaGadol kayam, mikachim et HaChodesh al pi Rieeya. U'shabatel, batla Rieeya, u'batel HaKiddush. Very simple. He just summarized exactly what we read. When there is a Beit Din, then you could use Kiddush HaChodesh with Rieeya, and when it's batel, then the notion of using Rieeya and the Kiddush HaChodesh is done. We don't use it; it's nullified. Instead, we use the Cheshbon, and that's what we do. Now, Haramban b'Hasagotav, the Sefer HaMitzvot. The Ramban wrote critical glosses in the Sefer HaMitzvot. He criticized the Rambam. He didn't like what he wrote. He thought it was wrong. He thought he left something out. So Mitzvot say Kufnun Gimel Katav. V'nei davar baru hu v'yadua. Shebeit Din HaGadol batel me'eretz Yisrael v'afilu kodem ha'churban. Excuse me, Rambam, but there was no Beit Din HaGadol already in Eretz Yisrael. It was batel well before the churban of the Beit HaMikdash happened. Rotza lomar, meaning shlo haya bahem din Beit Din HaGadol. They no longer had the stature of being Beit Din HaGadol. Kamash amru b'perakam me'avodah zara, mesachet avodah zara, adav cherem medbet. Arba'im shana ad shelo charev habayit, galta Sanhedrin v'yashva l'bachanut. 40 years before the churban of the Beit HaMikdash, the Sanhedrin already was exiled, and it sat in what's called the Chanut, which is an area in Yerushalayim, not in the Lishkat HaGazit. Lamai Hilchata asks the Gemara over there. So what if it moved? Lomar shlo danu dinin nefashot, meaning once the Beit Din HaGadol, Sanhedrin HaGadol, is no longer in the chamber of hewn stone on the Har HaBayit, once they moved out, they no longer used the function for capital cases. They were no longer a high court for that purpose. Why? And he explains. Why? Because the Gemara says, from the place that God will choose. Milamed, Shamakom Gorem. The place is what is essential, is vital. To be the Sanhedrin HaGadol, in other words, it's not just they need 71 judges, but they have to be in a particular location on planet Earth. And if they're not there, they no longer have the ma'amad of a Beit Din HaGadol. So this is the Ramban to the Rambam. You just said that as long as the Beit Din HaGadol and the functions of the Beit Din HaGadol, they can be Mikoveya, the Chodesh, al pi Rieeya. But they weren't a Beit Din HaGadol already 40 years before the Churban. In 30 of the Common Era, halachically, they weren't considered a Beit Din HaGadol. So what are you talking about? Kolomar, Kol Zman, Sanhedrin Gedolah b'Makomam. Av Mishigal Sanhedrin Gedolah b'Makom Ha'u, Batlu Din Nefashim Kol Yisrael. It's done. Okay, you wanted to ask? Larry had a question, and I think Ronnie had a question.
I did, yeah.
Wait, hold on. Larry first. Yeah. Right. That's not what it's not what the Rambam's saying here. The Rambam seems to be saying somehow that you need some kind of Sanhedrin that's going to do it. And the Ramban sounds like he's taking it to mean that it must be the Beit Din Hagadol.
I'm interpreting Rambam is saying he's not saying this explicitly. Yes, a Kiddush HaChodesh is recorded 23, but in order for that court of 23 to have jurisdiction, there must be a court of 71.
In the Lishkat Hagazit.
That's how
I think that was the Ramban's understanding. Sounds like it.
Yeah,
Yes. Somehow that gives it a stature. Ronnie, you want to ask? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we were saying before that you need a Beis Din of 23 for capital cases. And they're not co-situated with the Sanhedrin on Har HaBayit.
They are actually. There is Sanhedrin Katan up there too.
You can't have a Sanhedrin, you can't have a Beis Din of 23 in Cheshbon. It's got to be Yerushalayim. So my question is,
so we did discuss that every Shevet actually had a Beit Din, a Sanhedrin Ketana.
Right.
But to Larry's point, it sounds like the idea is there needs to be a Beit Din Hagadol in Yerushalayim on the Har HaBayit. As soon as they've moved off of there, none of the courts can prosecute a capital case.
Oh, okay.
And that was based on the Gemara in Masachet Avodah Zarah and Daf Chet that we just read a moment ago. Right.
Yeah.
So in other words, there's something about the fact that it's in Yerushalayim in the right place that energizes all the other Batei Din. But if it's not there, somehow it no longer functions. Yeah, it's no longer going to work.
Not there, meaning in Yerushalayim.
On the Har
HaBayit in Yerushalayim. Right. This is the Ramban's view. The Ramban says to the Rambam, right, basically, wait a second. You know that the Beit Din Hagadol was already canceled well before. So if there was no Beit Din Hagadol, so the whole Sanhedrin system was falling apart. So, right, and he gives another example. Va'afilu, I'm 3 lines up from the bottom. Va'afilu b'yitziatam misham l'tayel me'at u'lechazer batal kochan u'rusutan mehem ad sheyu b'mekoman. If they would go out to take a little trip, they went on a spatzir or something, they went walking. They do not have that status when they're outside. Sanhedrin, Daf Yud Amud Bet. This is the case of a rebellious elder, a Zakin Mamre. So he bucks up against the Sanhedrin Hagadol. He's a rebellious Chacham. They're going to have to prosecute him. However, Mitza'an Abeit Pagi, V'himra Aleihen, if he became a Zakin Mamre when he found them in another place called Beit Pagi, and he saw the judges there having a conference, Yachatahem Ra'atoham Ra'ah, V'chulei. Right? But what does the Gemara end up saying? No, it's not, because they weren't sitting in the Sanhedrin's place. They were on a tiul. Kol shekein la'achar churban. K'mo she'amru od b'perak arba mitot, daf nun bet, amud bet. Bizman she'ein, kohen, ein shofet. Right? Once there's no kohen, meaning no kohen gadol, there can't be a shofet either. U'me'otah sha'ah, batlu kol adinin hatlin b'beit din hagadol. All judgment that's related to the Beit Din Hagadol, that's somehow connected to them, would all fall apart. According to your logic, Rambam, there shouldn't have been able to be any kind of Kiddush al pi Rieeya 40 years before the Churban, because the Beit Din Hagadol is not in its place, so all the other Batei Din have lost their stature, as Larry correctly pointed out. Once that happened, so what are you telling me? It's always, they kept going. It has to do with the Beit Din being in Eretz Yisrael. The Rambam was careful. He said Eretz Yisrael. If you look back on the other page, it said the Beit Din in Eretz Yisrael. So Ramban writes, V'yadua v'kal mekomot b'Gemara, shayu osin kach adzman karv l'stimut Talmud. You have this in the Gemara in several places that clearly they were Mekadesh even until the time of Stimat Talmud. Ukushiato giluya ve'ena tzricha bir. The Rav writes, his question is so revealed and known, it doesn't even require explication. The truth is, the Rambam also was sensitive to this reality. Right? The Bizman Shein Sanhedrin Kovim Al Piriya Katava Bahag. Because before the Rambam ever wrote what he wrote, his idea, halach l'moshe misinai, that when there's no Sanhedrin, we automatically move to be kovei al pi cheshbon. The Baal Halacha Gedolah had already written, ume'ematai hitchilu kol Yisrael l'chashu b'cheshbon zeh misof chachmei haGemara beit shecharva Eretz Yisrael v'nishar sham beitin kavua. So in the Bahag, Baal Halacha Gedolah, who is earlier to the Rambam, he wrote that when did they start using the cheshbon? At the end of the Chachmei HaGemara, which is much later. The Gemara is going till the year 500 of the Common Era. So at the time when Eretz Yisrael was destroyed, and there was no longer a Beit Din Kavua left, remember, there's no Beit HaMikdash for much of the time that there's Chachmei HaMishnah. It's destroyed in 70, and the Mishnah is not written until 200, so all the Chum from 70 to 200 are post the Churban. And the Chachmei Gemara ad Yemei Abai v'Rava. Abai and Rava is not really the end of Chachmei Talmud, but they're most prominent of all Chachamim in the Shas. The Gra claims that you can't flip 3 pages in Shas without finding the name of Abai and Rava. I'll take his word for it. So, but they're around in the 4th century of the Common Era. They would do it because there was a kviyut attached to Eretz Yisrael, right? By the establishment of Eretz Yisrael, they would rely. Hare shishtamesh b'munach beitin kavua b'mekom beitin hagadol and Hedri Gedola. Notice that the Baal Gedola talked about a beitin kavua. As long as there was a beitin kavua, an established beitin in Eretz Yisrael, it was good enough for Kiddush HaChodesh al pi Rieeya, using witnesses. It didn't say beitin hagadol or Sanhedrin Gedola. The Cholzman.
Does that mean 23?
Exactly. Maybe even only 3. Maybe even only 3. Beit Din Kavua doesn't have to be a Sanhedrin. Beit Din of 3, we saw already in the Gemara and the Mishnah that 3 would be good enough. Remember? For Kiddush HaChodesh.
I'm going off, stop it, please. Does that mean that the judges would rotate?
They needed 3 judges to judge it to make the Kiddush HaChodesh.
Courthouse downtown on Washington Street.
Has to be a federal judge, so to speak. Has to be a Beit Din
Let's say.
with a mumchim, the smuchim from the Sanhedrin Agad. Yeah, yeah.
Wouldn't have to be the same 3 individuals. I mean, one of them may die eventually, but
Has to be 3 people who are members of the Sanhedrin Agad. But it could only be 3 of them. It's good enough. They could be a Beit Din Kavua, or they were authorized by the Sanhedrin Agadol in an unbroken chain, and they're the Beit Din Kavua. That's the question. The Halacha Gedolah didn't say Beit Din Agadol, Sanhedrin Gedolah. He said the Beit Din Kavua, right? And therefore he writes, the Rav writes, the Chol Zman she Beit Din Kavua haya kayam hayukov ma pi Rieeya. V'zeh b'hetem l'shitato the Kiddush HaChodesh talui b'Beit Din Hagadol. Yeah. So it sounds like if there's a Beit Din Kavua that it was alive, there would be koveya by the Rieeya, right? And that sounds like it's that works like according to the Rambam, even though the Rambam didn't use the language either way. He just talked about a Beit Din. If you look back at the Rambam, first page, so he didn't say the word Beit Din Hagadol. He just said that there has to be a Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael, right? Or a Beit Din Smuchim be'Eretz Yisrael that got reshut from the Sanhedrin. Here's referring to the Sanhedrin Hagadol that's doing this, right? That empowered some subset group to keep going, even though they couldn't get all 71 together, as you have some. The Ramban's question was, wait, but they're really only a Sanhedrin Hagadol with that kind of authority when they're in the Lishkat Hagazit. And they were exiled from there 40 years before the end. So why are you making it about them? Why don't you just say any 3 Dayanim would be good enough? Or something like that. Yeah, sure. Special lending library.
Yeah,
So
our calendar got established by Hillel when around 300-400 of the so clearly
That's
they had
debatable.
that. So clearly, until we had the established calendar, they had to do it al pi Rieeya. No, I mean,
no, no. No. The Hillel Sheni, we know that Shmuel from Rav and Shmuel is already very adept at doing things having to do with the Kviyut HaChodesh, and we kept saying we saw it inside it. It sounds very much from the Rambam, not from this one, but in general, they knew already the whole time how to calculate everything. They weren't using it because they had another system that was taking precedence. The Rambam here is talking about the switch between one system and the next.
You're saying they had a choice, basically.
But they didn't, but yes, they had a choice, but they didn't rely on the Cheshbon.
Got
They
it.
relied on the Kiddush al pi Rieeya, right? So, but the point is, with the Beit Din HaGadol, we use Rieeya. If you don't have the Beit Din HaGadol, the Rambam seems to say, then you use Cheshbon. So the Ramban says, you didn't have a Beit Din HaGadol with the stature of Beit Din HaGadol because they were demoted as soon as they left the Har HaBayit in time of the Churban, right? It's Hamakom Asher Yivcha Hashem, means the Makom is Gorim, means the place is determinative. If they're not in the place, they could call themselves whatever they want, but they've lost some of their legislative power. They're not going to do capital cases anymore, and no place will do capital cases, and they will no longer be able to be establishing the Beit Din, the Kiddush HaChodesh al pi Rieeya. And then he just quoted here from the Baal Halacha Gedolot, who also had this idea that someone's connected to Eretz Yisrael, but notice he used the language Beit Din Kavua, right? Instead of saying Beit Din HaGadol or Sanhedrin Gedola. He used a different language, right? Because why? Because the Bahag holds the Cholzman Shebeit Din Kavua Hayakayam Hayukov Ma Pi Rieeya. V'zeu Beit Din L'Shitato. The Kiddush HaChodesh Talui Beit Din HaGadol. Bram, however, Kushiyat Ramban Be'ena Omedet. But the question of the Ramban stands. Deha Mem Shana Kodem Shechar V'Abayit Batlu Dine Beit Din HaGadol. Kimavur b'Shabbat Tedvav Mid Aleph, Avodah Zara Chet Amud Bet, Sanhedrin Mem Aleph Mid Aleph. All these different sources in Shas that tell us that 40 years before the Churban, the Beit Din HaGadol lost its power because it left the place which it needed to be in to have its full staying power. But the Rambam seems to say that it's continued with its power. How could that be? Yeah.
No, I just quickly, you had mentioned that any three eating, but don't they have to be kosher eating? Can't just be any three people.
No. What do you mean Eidim? 3 Dayanim.
I'm sorry, three dayanim.
But the 3 Dayanim are not just Stam Dayanim. They're not Dayanim
That's what I
Hedyotim.
meant.
They're Davka Dayanim Mumchim, which means that they got smicha from the Beit Din HaGadol,
Fine.
or a direct line from that.
Okay.
So, the point here is,
I just wanted some, just.
okay, and the point here is he's just saying right here that, the idea here of the Ramban, look, if you keep going, he writes here, with Teveri Mishnah, there wasn't even a Sanhedrin Gadol anymore right at the time, right after the Chatim Mishnah, Kidi'ita B'Rosh Hashanah Lamed Aleph Amud Bet. We're going to come to that Gemara. There was no longer a Beit Din HaGadol anywhere. In Teveri, the last station of the Sanhedrin, 10 places was exiled to, is Teveri, and then it disbands. But somehow, without a Beit Din HaGadol, they still went all the way al pi Rieeya until the end of the Chachmei HaGemara. Rambam. That sounds like it's not like the Rambam said, because the Rambam was talking about you need a Beit Din. If you have a Beit Din Kavua, you could do al pi Rieeya. If you don't, then you have to do calculation. So they didn't have it anymore, but they continued doing al pi Rieeya. How could that be? Udvarav b'perak halacha gimel the kviyut al pi Rieeya batlek shacharav Eretz Yisrael v'nishar sham Beit Din Kavua stumim v'chatumim d'mal perish shel Kavua. Asks the Rav, I don't understand the Rambam, because the Rambam says in halacha gimel in the same parak hey of Kiddush HaChodesh, that the kviyut using Rieeya was canceled only once Eretz Yisrael was destroyed. What does that mean? Destroyed means there was no longer a Beit Din Kavua left. But what does that mean? What does Kavua mean? It's the question we're all asking. What does this word Kavua mean? Yeah? He makes it clear that it kept going somewhat dependent on Eretz Yisrael, not in Yerushalayim. The Ramban says, excuse me, the Kiddush HaChodesh is not happening anywhere you like it. It's you by yourself, the way you yourself said it, Rambam, the Sanhedrin Gadol is meant to do it, representing the whole Jewish people in Yerushalayim on the Har HaBayit. But when they're not on the Har HaBayit, you see that from all sorts of other sources, they don't really have a stature of being the Sanhedrin Gadol. So why did they switch right then and there to the Al Pi Cheshbon? No, they kept going. Well, how come? And the Baal Halacha Gedolot says it was all the way to the end of Chachmei HaGemara, and the Rambam seems to go in that direction also, at least saying, as long as there was a Beit Din Kavua in Eretz Yisrael, they still could do it. But when Eretz Yisrael was gone, there was no Yishuv left, there were not enough people left, they didn't have a Beit Din left, then it was no longer possible to speak of Kiddush Rieeya. That's when they switched to Cheshbon. Judah.
They had to maintain it for the sake of civil order.
for being cautious, right?
Yeah.
It's not clear that they're really in charge of that anymore. There are other powers that control things. The Romans are there. They're in charge.
So what they were relying on, they
Relying, I don't have that much choice. I mean,
So are we allowed to, and like this day, this like, if you.
is this enough now for us to have a Beit Din? Again, it's a question. Let's keep going. Let's see what he says. So he continues. He says, Uva emet de b'mechilta, hetika Ramban b'sagotav Sefer HaMitzvot. It's underlined over here. The previous reader underlined it. That would be me. Uva emet de b'mechilta, the Ramban copied it in his critical glosses in the Sefer HaMitzvot. Mavur kediver harambam. What does the Mechilta say? The Medrash Halach on Sefer Shmot. Rav Yoshia Omer, Minayin ata Omer, she'ein ma'abim mirashana el bebeitin hagadol seb Yerushalayim. Right there. Talmud Lamar, Rishon hu lachem, dabru el kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Right? As the pasuk says, it's the first for you. Speak to the entire assembly of the Jewish people. Ella. So it sounds like, wow, it's kind of like what the Rambam wanted to say. It has to do with the Beit Din HaGadol. But he mentioned here, if you look carefully, Yerushalayim. El Ramban, shecholek al Rambam, v'sorach de ein kiddush al pi Rieeya v'ibur hashana mipnei atzman v'atzorach tluim b'Beit Din HaGadol. The Ramban doesn't agree with the Rambam. He doesn't think it has to do with the Beit Din HaGadol. He thinks that maybe it could be any three judges, not related to the Beit Din HaGadol. He explains, give me 1 minute to finish the sentence, please. The Divrei Rabbi Yoshia, Kai al Zman Niuk Sanhedrin Gedola. He explains that Rabbi Yoshia is really talking about the time when there is a Sanhedrin Gedola. The Az Kiddush HaChodesh v'Ibur Hashana Misurim Lahem. That's when the Kiddush HaChodesh and the intercalation of the year, Ibur Shana, is connected to them. Any three judges, according to the Ramban, not related to Sanhedrin anymore, because we don't have a Sanhedrin. They're real people, but they don't function that way. It's not Noveya, it's not flowing from the power of the Beit Din HaGadol of the Jewish people. That can only be when they're in their chambers. In this chamber of hewn stones, Lishkat HaGad Yerushalayim. They moved, so then find any three mumchin, put them down in front of a nice table, put a tablecloth, and they'll be the judges, and they'll be Makabal Edut, and they can make Kiddush HaChodesh happen, just like that. But the Rambam, the way he made it sound is, as long as you have a Beit Din, meaning the Beit Din HaGadol, and it can function some way, somehow, in Eretz Yisrael, good enough. But Rambam, they weren't really of that standing. Of course, the Rambam knew this. So what the Rav is trying to do is to understand, what is the Rambam driving at? Because he clearly knew, he must have anticipated the Ramban and others would say to him, but there wasn't a Sanhedrin HaGadol already 40 years before the Churban, let alone after the Churban, till the end of Chachmei HaGemara. And you notice that the Baal Halach Gadol said a Beit Din Kavua Davka, established court. He didn't say what that court was. The Rambam thinks it means Kavua Sanhedrin HaGadol, but the Ramban goes in another direction. He thinks, no, this halacha, quoted from the Mechilta, that I underlined from the Mechilta, is if there is a Beit Din HaGadol in Yerushalayim, then you could be Ma'aber the Shana, right? However, if there isn't one, so then you need to just take the fallback is three mumchin, any three mumchin. The Rambam says, no, it's still has to be Beit Din HaGadol. Ramban says to them, there is no Beit Din HaGadol. Call them whatever they want. Okay, now let me take some questions. Let me come up for air before we go to the next sentence. Please, Larry.
Definition of is Lamda, not someone that's smicha from.
Right, Lav Davka. Mumcha is an expert.
Okay. I don't understand how from the pasuk on or Rishon who called Rav and called Dr. Israel.
Dabil called Dabil Israel. Yeah.
When you get from there, you have to have a court of 23.
This is the drasha. The drasha is Rabbi Yoshia says, from where do you say that you're not going to be ma'aber the shana unless you have a Beit Din HaGadol in Yerushalayim? The answer is that this is the first month for you. Speak to the entire assembly of the Jewish people. Who's the entire assembly? The entire assembly of judges, representing the whole nation. Exactly. But that's the drasha. The Ramban, the Rabbi Yoshia is an Amora. He can say what he wants. I mean, not what he wants, because he has a Masorah, clearly. That's how it goes. Yeah. But when you get to the Ramban says he's cholek on the Rambam, and he thinks that you can have Kiddush al pi Rieeya. You don't need a Beit Din HaGadol. He thinks what Rabbi Yoshia is saying is when you have a Sanhedrin HaGadol, that's one thing. right? Then it's given over to them. But when there's no Sanhedrin Gadol, get any three experts, they can be Mekadesh al pi Rieeya. And here's the words of the Ramban. Let's read it in the Ramban because it's now the line, the vertical line. Follow your eye along there. Here's the block of text from the Ramban so you understand what he's saying by actually hearing the quote directly. Ve'eluhem divrei Ramban. Bizman shehaya lahem beitin hagadol, haya davar masur lahem. Vehem hayu mekadshim hachodesh u'me'abrim hashanim. Lo beitin acher. When there was a beitin hagadol, it was given over to them. They were mekadesh the chodesh. They did the ibur shana. They didn't just get another beitin to do it. Had to be them. Why? Writes the Ramban. Mipnei shirashut kol Yisrael netula mikol beitin acher imahem. V'hayu maskimin. So all the authority of the whole nation was taken away from all other batei din and given over just to them, and with consent. Meaning, because this is the problem that we're trying to figure out. But there were other courts in the Jewish people. There were 23, a court of 23 in every tribe. Even in Yerushalayim, there was a court of 23 in addition to the 71. So, no. When it came to Kiddush HaChodesh, when there was a Beit in Yerushalayim, says the Ramban, there was actually a Beit in HaGadol that ruled the roost. They were the central authority. Nobody else had any authority for this. Of a Yirali, Shebizman Shebein HaMikdash Kayam, Shayu Beit in HaGadol B'Mekomam, V'lahem HaReshut N'Tuna, Min HaKatuv, Shenemar Al Pi HaDavar Shegidu Lecha, Min HaMakom Hahu HaSheivcha Hashem, Lo Yereshut L'Shum Adam La'abur L'Kadesh Ela Lahem, Ober Shutan, V'chin Amr B'Mechilta Rabbi Yosia. It seems to me, says the Ramban, when the Beit HaMikdash was standing, when the Beit Din HaGadol was in Yerushalayim, in its correct place, and it's darshing the pasuk that they are min hamakom ahu, that without being in the makom, they lose their license, basically, that from the place. During that time, no one else could be ma'aber or mekadesh anything. It was only them, or they could give license to someone else, but it had to be either them or someone giving license. And that's what the Mechilta is driving at when the Rabbi Yoshia said that in the up above, where I underlined the line. That's what he meant. He meant that when there is that his limud that he has, again, you don't like the drush from the pasuk. It's not clear. Was it a creative endeavor on his part, or more likely he got it received Masorah from his rebbeim? That's the code in the Torah. When it says that, that's what it means. And we assume that in this case, it seems to me it's the latter, but it could be just my failure to understand the exact derivation. But essentially, when there's a Beit Din HaGadol, says the Ramban, what Rabbi Yoshia is trying to say is no other court functions with any jurisdiction whatsoever to Mekadesh the Chodesh. V'data Rambanhi. I circled the word Ramban here because here we are, and the underlined line at the bottom of the page. V'data Rambanhi. The Afabi the Kiddush al pi Rieeya eino taloi b'Beit Din HaGadol. The truth is, according to the Ramban, Kiddush al pi Rieeya doesn't really require the Beit Din HaGadol mikol makom. Bizman shesanhedrin gedola no heget me'akevadhi. Even though the Ramban really thinks that any three experts who know what they're doing, not hedjotot, but professional dayanim, like CRC dayanim, they're dayanim. They're not stam just people they brought in, come sit down, and they're people mamash have yad and smicha. They know what they're doing. Yeah. So three mumchin, but when there's a Beit Din HaGadol in Yerushalayim, they all basically defer to them. But that's where the Rambam disagrees with the Ramban. And this is the place where the Ramban and the Rambam disagree, says the Rav. The Ramban holds that really any three could do it. But when there's a Sanhedrin Gadol, well, we defer to them. They're the biggest guns in the room. They take over. But the Rambam says, no, I maintain, and this is why it's a mystery. The Rambam seems to say, says the Rav, I maintain that Rabbi Yoshia said is not only when there's a Beit Din HaGadol, but always Kiddush HaChodesh must be by the Beit Din HaGadol, which leaves us with this question, because the Ramban had a good criticism, which is
71.
71. There's only one Sanhedrin HaGadol. Yeah, Sanhedrin HaGadol, Sanhedrin Gedola, Sanhedrin HaGadol, it's 71. The Ramban says to them, but they really didn't have that stature already 40 years before the Churban, and you and I both agree that they still did it al pi Rieeya till there was no more proper Beit Din left in Eretz Yisrael. So what are you talking about that has to do with Sanhedrin HaGadol? We both agree on the facts, don't we, that there wasn't Beit Din HaGadol? So what are you talking about? Mimachloket, second to last line on the page. Machloket Yisodit Zu, Novat Plukta Chadasha. From here, we come to a new machloket, a new plukta, new argument between these two. Harambam sover, dishnei mine kviyat moadim namru. The Rambam thinks there are two types in the sprach of the base matters, zwei dinim, two rules, two laws. Dishnei mine kviat mo'adim namru. Aleph, Kiddush al pi ha-Rieeya v'ibar hashana yipnei zman or hatzorech. That's number one. Al pi Rieeya. Ukviyut zu misur lebeitin hagadol. And bet kviyut al pi Cheshbon izman she'ein Sanhedrin Gedola kayemet. Two different tracks. Track one, Kiddush al pi Rieeya, requires Sanhedrin Hagadol. Track number two, Kiddush al pi Cheshbon, when there's no Sanhedrin Hagadol. We're still off with this strange conundrum. The Ramban is saying to he's knocking on the door, there isn't a Sanhedrin Hagadol 40 years before on the books. So what are you talking about? Kviyot elu mehavot lefi shitat Rambam, shtei chaluyot dinim miyuchadim v'shonim, ushtei halachot mesuyamot. According to the Rambam, this establishment is two different chalos din, two different what's the word? Going into two different laws that are effective, that are unique, and they're different, and two separate halachot. V'itzuma shakviyut mo'adim nechlak lishnei sugim v'ikarim nifradim, and the essence of the establishment of holidays is now divided into two different types, two different principles that separate out. Rieeya v'cheshbon. There's one is seeing and doing al pi Rieeya, one is al pi Cheshbon. Contradistinction to that is the Ramban. The Ramban cholek al zeh. V'sover deleka shtei chaluyot dinim mesuyamot shakviyut mo'adim. The Ramban does not think there are two different laws going into effect on like two different tracks. It's one or the other. Al pi Rieeya v'al pi Cheshbon. Ukviyut mo'adim b'zman hazeh lo nishtanta b'mahuta v'tochana mikviyut beitin al pi Rieeya. Right? So he thinks that there's he thinks there's not two chaluyot dinim mesuyamot of kviyut mo'adim apir al pi Cheshbon, right? Ukviyut al mo'adim is manazeh lo nishtanta b'mahuta utchunata mikviyut beitin al pi Rieeya. The idea that we're koveya nowadays, it's no different essentially than what it was in the kviyut beitin al pi Rieeya. B'chol chidush shel Rambam. The Yeshnal halach l'Moshe Misinai hamatbi'a et chotama al kviyuto kviyatenu bizman hazeh nidcha yidei haRamban b'shtei yadayim. The Ramban rejects with two hands the Kiddush of the Rambam, who claimed that there was a halach l'Moshe Misinai that the only way you could do Kiddush al pi Rieeya was through the Beit Din Hagadol. He thinks this whole thing is just dead wrong. All right. And nowadays there is no new idea of a kviyut of mo'adim. Everything just stems from what? You could say the Hillel, the grandson of Rebbe, that was referenced earlier in the shir, who made up a calendar. That's all. But there's no new chalot shem kviyut chosh. But for the Rambam, there's two different tracks, and both tracks go all the way back to the beginning. They're both coming from Har Sinai. This is what I was referencing before. Right? Don't think they didn't understand how to use the calendar. They did from the beginning. They just didn't use that system because they had Sanhedrin Hagadol. When they had Sanhedrin Hagadol, that was going to enact it. But when they didn't have that, then they did al pi Cheshbon. And you know when they figured out the Cheshbon? Already at the beginning they knew the Cheshbon. They just didn't use it because they had to use the other system because that's the mitzvah. But for the Ramban, it's just one system. The system is, as long as it's Beit Din Kavua, we can do it the way we do it with a mumchin. Doesn't have to be Beit Din Hagadol. It's when it's had Beit Din Hagadol, beautiful, but you don't have that, so it reverts to what? Any three mumchin could do it. And what's the calendar? It's a system that was made up just to carry us forward because we don't have the original system. It's not a second system that actually continues to function from the power of some kind of initial halach l'Moshe Misinai. That's their argument. Lefi divrei Ramban, al chalot shem kviyat mo'adim chadasha, ki'im al kviyat Hillel ben beno shel Rebbe. It's just a continuity on kviyut al pi Rieeya. We can't do it that way anymore. So one of the Chachamim wrote out a whole calendar to keep us going, extending what we had from the days al pi Rieeya. But the Rav noticed that the Rambam seems to think it's two different halach l'Moshe Misinai that are running in parallel. You're either going to use one or the other. In the Ramban's view, Kiddush al pi cheshbon is a historical contingency. We're stuck. What can we do? But yeah, but for the Rambam, oh no, it was by design. You're either going to use system 1 or system 2, but they come from what's the original source? Halacha l'Moshe Misinai. A backup. Yeah, like why we gave out the color pages with all the planets and the whole thing with the kid with the figuring out the calculations and all that. Don't worry, that color thing was in the back of Moshe Rabbeinu's Gemara on Har Sinai. Hashem was showing him how this works. We only took the first steps into this. I know I'm like leaving it like open, like you're gonna finish, but I can't because we're over time and people have other things they got to go to. But please keep the sheets, or you can hand it back and give it next week. By the time we're done with this essay, I don't want to make a promise. I hope you'll have a new understanding of the incredible nature of the analysis of the Rav, of the Rambam, and especially of how the Kiddush HaChodesh did function and functions ad yom hazeh in all of our shuls around the world. I can't give it more than a plug than that. Okay, that's all I have time for tonight. But okay,